With me in this episode is Thomas Kinsella, co-founder and COO of Tines. Before Tines, Thomas worked in consulting, then as a lead e-crime investigator, and then as the leader of security operations at DocuSign when they IPO'd in 2018. There he learned more about the challenges that come along with working in a modern SOC, especially around the perils of lacking automation. Him and his co-founder Owen left DocuSign and launched Tines with the goal of making automation more accessible for security teams through a no-code platform. Now, they're one of the hottest startups in the security space and growing rapidly. Now, before we get into the episode, a quick note from our sponsor, Security Funded. The Security Funded newsletter is a weekly recap of global funding and M&A news in the cybersecurity space, along with curated articles and tweets. It's like the Strictly VC or Term Sheet newsletters, but specific to cybersecurity companies. Security Funded is my personal go-to resource for catching up on the latest investing activity, and it's one of the first things that I look at every Monday morning. There's a link in the show notes to go ahead and sign up, and best of all, it's completely free. So with that, let's get to the episode. Thomas, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So thinking back to the beginning of your career, you started at Deloitte and you did your kind of requisite 1 year in Big Four, and no hard feelings for choosing Deloitte as an ex-KPMGer myself. But the first experience that I really want to touch on there is the next opportunity, which was when you went over to eBay and you were working in their e-crimes division. And as a part of that, you worked with law enforcement agencies across the entire globe. This was your second real experience in the security space. How did that experience maybe alter your perspective on the role of cybersecurity across the globe and how law enforcement agencies are involved in maybe struggling with some of those challenges?
Yeah, it was an absolutely fascinating area. So like at the time, like eBay Inc. owned PayPal, and eBay and PayPal were in many ways like bigger players than they were today. They're bigger companies now, but they don't represent as much of the like the e-commerce ecosystem as they used to. But also noting that eBay and PayPal were the number 2 and number 1 phished brands in the world at that time. So we were targeted all the time for account takeovers, targeted all the time for scams. The whole like second chance offer or like posting fake ads on Amazon wasn't quite as common. eBay was that like that place where all these scams happened. And my role, or my team's role, we were like the team that were responsible for finding the largest criminal organizations that were targeting eBay and PayPal, and working with law enforcement for attribution and prosecution. So to find out who these people were and get them arrested. So there was like a lot of really, really interesting learning. Some of them terrifying, just how much information is out there, like OSINT style, that when you log into a platform, you leave a little bit of a trail, and we'll, in a lot of cases, be able to identify you. But yeah, we got to work with law enforcement on a whole load of different cases. So some were large scale account takeovers, some were carding, some were like network intrusions. The big ones that we worked on were a lot of those like persistent, like organized criminal networks that were like hiring money mules to cash out large amounts of money through PayPal or through like account takeovers where they'd list, a car or something like that on eBay. And then you'd pay $20,000 for a car, and then there'd be like an entire method to cash that out as well. Some like some large like malware groups as well that we investigated. But in terms of like working with law enforcement and the perspective that it gave me, actually maybe in terms of like the e-crime side and the perspective that it gave me, and like the cybercrime ecosystem, one thing I'll say is that like the talent, talent is a strange word, but the talent of the people on the other side is incredible. And like you would see them like shift up their patterns. Like some of the groups, their OPSEC was just unreal. We're talking like, VPNing through several different servers in order to like to get to you using like whatever directional antenna from like 2 kilometers away to break into one of their neighbors. Their neighbors' Wi-Fi's. There was even like cases of obviously like completely separate side channel communications and things like that. So even cases that like we had one particular group they were tracking in Romania where they knew that like based on we were able to get up into their C2, but when we got up into their C2, like we knew that they were Romanian, and we knew because when we tracked the money going back through like Western Union and places like that, we knew that it was going to Romania. But even when we were able to do that, we weren't able to like find the originating like IP, even though we were up on their C2s. And the reason was that when they were doing this, they actually like they sent out, we found out they sent out like fake like you've just won the lottery malware to a whole load of like thousands of people in Romania, so that they would have like their own botnet of no purpose, not like to steal credentials or anything, just like their own botnet of first hop for their for like connecting their C2 and stuff like that. So it's absolutely fascinating. Anyway, the first perspective is incredibly smart, incredibly like resilient. Still, several of those guys got arrested. The second part about it, I suppose, is that like it's really, really hard. Like we did not get any law enforcement interest unless the amount was usually over about $1 million.
Wow.
So like it was, if you stole like you know 100 grand from somebody, nobody really cared. Like you'd go to law enforcement and it'd be okay, cool, but like unless we can group them into, you know, a group where there's at least $1 million and you've got some element of attribution, there's no real opportunity. If you did have that and you managed to like group them into, you know, hey, we know it's this whatever group that are like taking over all these accounts, and you went to law enforcement, it was still even hard then, because you'd have to persuade. So we worked very closely with like Romanian law enforcement, with Europol, and then we also worked with like the FBI and the Secret Service. But like you'd have, you know, a VPN in whatever VPN in the US that was being used. So you need like the logs from there. You'd have like accounts that are being taken over in the United States. You'd have money mules in the United States, but you'd have Western Union sending money to Bulgaria, and actually the you know, whatever the victim was, you know, from Canada or something like that. Now you need like, or even from, you know, the victims in Ohio, and somebody else's, like the account that was taken over is in like Virginia. Now all of a sudden you need like, you know, 5 or 6 different groups to pool together,
Right.
and you're just not getting any interest from law enforcement until you're actually able to make a big case. They pick up in many cases like the first level money mules, so those people that like allowed their card to be used or allowed their bank account to be used, but in most cases they were victims, and that was really hard. And the last thing I'll say, just in terms of like working with law enforcement, some of them were like, everybody was like, they were all very professional. Some of them were a lot more keen to partner, and other people were a lot more keen to give me the evidence and we'll do all the investigation. And
interesting.
I totally understood it. But those people that you partnered with, like we were able to say, oh, that's interesting. Like, and it's not maybe like GDPR play a bit of a different role now, but like they'd say, hey, actually, you know, like we're looking, like I think it's Kyle, and they'd be like, that's really interesting. Kyle's actually on our like suspect list because he was involved in this thing over here. And you're like, okay, and then you drill in a little bit more into Kyle. But there'd be other people that would say, I think it's Kyle, and then you'd hear nothing, and you'd put together like a dossier on Kyle or a dossier on some like anonymous whatever person, and then like, you know, 3 months later, not 3 months later, like a year and a half later, like it'd be like Kyle was just picked up, and you're like, that's amazing. But also like, if you'd given me a heads up like half an hour ago, I would have been able to look like a rock star in my team.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Nothing happened. But yeah, after you built up some relationships with law enforcement and with banks, like banks were actually like, we built up, we had a really good like intel. We ran like spoof at eBay and spoof at PayPal.com. So we had like a real good source of like, like bank accounts that were being abused. When we partnered with them, we developed like a pretty good like working group that were able to like go to law enforcement together. But yeah, it was a real interesting like cat and mouse game. And unfortunately, too few people arrested, but it was interesting. So
that was one of the things that I wanted to ask about, actually. But I also just wanted to comment on, it sounds like one of the biggest challenges that you probably ran into there was grouping activity under a larger organization, right? Because if the only way you can kind of get people arrested is to get law enforcement engagement, and the only way you can get law enforcement engagement is to get to that $1 million threshold, then you have to be able to provide that sort of evidence that links these different crimes together. And I'm sure from your perspective, it's like, hey, we want to arrest as many of these people as possible. So how can we like do as much diligence as possible to make sure that we can say definitively, oh, this person comes from this organization, and therefore law enforcement, you need to take action. But that was, again, one of the pieces I wanted to ask about. Is you mentioned the one specific example where those folks were arrested. I mean, what percentage of the time do you think like meaningful law enforcement action was taken in response to one of these.
So like, yeah, to be honest, probably it depended. Like if you got a little bit of traction in the case, you'd work more on it, right? So if you made some progress and you were you had identified certain people, or you knew that this was a particular gang that was doing this, you'd work very hard on that. And it could be they were stealing, like they were getting goods delivered to them that were like high value, and they were using stolen credit cards to pay for them, or it could be they were just taking over accounts and cashing them out or whatever. I'd say it's kind of hard to know, like, of the groups that were making more than $1 million, I'd say we were tracking probably like 80% of them. So we were like tracking like those we were tracking, like, as in we had, I'm not going to say intel on like who they were, but we had like pretty good intel on like, hey, this is their operation, this is like, what they're doing. When we saw a new campaign come in, we'd be like, yep, this is this campaign again, like this is this botnet or whatever, and we'd know a little bit more about them. Where it got harder was, obviously, like, even if you identified somebody, it would take a while. We had so it also depended on where they were, right? Russia, you're gonna get nowhere. And that's definitely going to be the case today. Even Ukraine, we didn't make much progress, but we had some early progress in Romania, and we hired a really fantastic guy who was like ex-US secrets, or sorry, ex-Romanian special forces. He set up then the cybercrime unit in the Romanian police. He was hired by the US Secret Service to like run their Eastern European office in Bucharest. And then his next job was like eBay. So he was like an e-crime investigator in eBay, and he knew everybody, but he was able to like get a whole load of arrests on. So from those groups in Romania, we were able to partner. But like that was an example of that partnership that I was saying earlier, that you're working very closely with law enforcement, and they'd bring you cases as well. They'd be like, hey, we've got this person, and we just did some forensics on their laptop, and we found like, hey, these item IDs, and you'd be like, those item IDs, that's really interesting. Now and they put in the requisite whatever subpoena for information, or so like it would be going through the legal channels, but you'd be like, whoa, hold on a second, I'm actually able to link this back to this much bigger group over here. And then we had like several very successful cases there.
It's interesting. Like, I would never think, when I just see e-crime, that like such a big part of it would be networking and knowing these folks across all these different agencies, and being able to have those connections and be, I guess, probably a reputable source in some ways to say like, hey, this is actually legitimate activity that needs to be followed up on. And I guess teaching the value of networking from an early point in your career, but certainly not one that I would expect it like sales or something like that.
No, but like it's also definitely not totally different networks, but you do. It's like a reputation as well, that like you, as you say, you develop a good reputation. It's like, hey, this person's trustworthy. They help, and we were very diligent in the reports that we wrote. And as you said, like making sure that the link between person A and person B is true. Then it's like, it's not just they logged in on the same IP 6 months apart. That's not irrelevant, but like that could be completely irrelevant if it's a whatever dynamic IP.
Sure.
Like then it's like that's that makes no difference. But being able to say like, hey, it could be they share the same cookie on like 3 different machines. They use this phone number, and I know this phone number is linked with this particular Facebook profile over here. And also, we found, from this dump of this like whatever e-crime database that we work with a bunch of different partners, that like that same IP that was used to register this account was also used to register this account, which is in their their alias's name in this underground market, etc. But the other part about it that I think was really hard was there's still like division of labor in in like in the cybercrime world, that we hear about it now. It's like, ransomware as a service. It was, even back then, like, there were money mules as a service. There's bulletproof hosting as a service. There's, like whatever bank accounts as a service. That's absolutely fine. But there's also people that, you hear about phishing kits, as a service, but like the entire ecosystem was separated. So even if you could tie, one person, say like, this is definitely the person that's receiving the credentials that are stolen. Just because they're receiving the credentials that are stolen from like the phished users, that doesn't necessarily mean they're the same person that's abusing those accounts. And it definitely doesn't mean that they're
Right.
the same. It definitely doesn't mean that they're the same person that when that account is abused is receiving the money at the very end of the trail. So you have to be, you have to graph out those networks as well.
Yeah.
And that's where when you're writing up that report with law enforcement, you kind of have to be a little bit like, you know what, this is the part that this person's responsible for.
Hmm.
But yeah, some law enforcement, like UK law enforcement, were great at helping build that out. They had their own databases of like fraud that they were trying to like track down and get as many, 20% of the crimes cleared, which they never. I don't want to speak to their stats, but they didn't really come close to. So
Sure.
it was really interesting, like just making sure that you were getting that correct as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. I feel like I could just talk about this for such a long time. This could be an entire episode in itself. I think the financial crime space within cybersecurity is just so relevant. And it's interesting to see how all these like organized crime groups play in that space and have to leverage cyber as like one of their tools for success in invading law enforcement. And I mean, you talked about it earlier too, right? The level of sophistication of all these different folks. But I do want to make sure that we get to the other
Yeah, of
elements of
course.
your story here. So I think if I'm getting my dates correctly, you ended up going to DocuSign in 2015. Is that right?
Mhm.
After roughly 3 years with eBay?
Yeah, so
Okay.
at the time, I moved over to the US for a little bit with eBay, which was great. But
Mm.
at the time, eBay and PayPal were splitting up, and or divorcing is probably a more real world
Sure.
word. But anyway, a lot of the team were fortunately or unfortunately going to PayPal, but my visa was with eBay, and the smart folks saw a little bit of where the trajectory is going. Like online payments is going to be the $100 billion industry. And yeah, they were probably right. But when the team was splitting up, one of my co-founder Owen, like he had taken a job in DocuSign. He's like, you know what, like
Mm.
come join me, and we'll set up the security operations team over here.
Mm.
So I came back to Dublin, and yeah, it was great. A great opportunity. Kind of didn't anticipate, I suppose, that at that stage of my career, but it was a real like build it up from scratch. So
Yeah. So we'll get into the full story with you and Owen when we get to Tynes, but when did you actually meet him? So did you meet him at eBay? Is that how you two first became connected?
I met. This is a story that the team like hearing, so I'll point them to the podcast. So I actually met at a like graduate recruitment event, where
Okay.
he persuaded me to like, or persuaded, we networked a little bit, and like I was impressed by him. I was like, oh, I should join. He was working in Deloitte, and I was like, oh, I should join
Mm.
Deloitte. And yeah, then worked with him in Deloitte, worked on
Got
some
it.
great projects and some terrible projects, and then we moved to, I could talk about professional service for a long time as well, but moved to eBay together, and then moved to DocuSign together, and then started Tynes together.
Oh
So
wow. Yeah, so you were both very kind of attached at the hip from pretty much the start of your career. That's interesting. And
yeah,
again, we'll
I
come
what
back to that.
yeah.
One piece I do want to touch on as far as DocuSign. Well, I mean, there's a couple elements. Obviously, it's a whole story in itself, but there's this piece that you just mentioned about, okay, Owen brought you over there. You guys kind of had this opportunity as a team to go and take it on, which I'm sure is compelling in itself, right? But one of the things that always comes to mind for me when someone in security goes and joins a fast growing tech company, there's so many fast growing tech companies that are out there today, right? And DocuSign's obviously done incredibly since then. They IPO'd in 2018 while you were still there. And obviously
Mhm.
we'll talk about that in a minute as well. But how do you choose like which high growth tech company you go and work at as a security professional, right? Because you're not working on the product itself, but ultimately like you want to be tied to a successful company. You want to work at a company that you believe in their mission or their impact on the world to some extent. And there's probably just an element of like picking a winner, right? I don't know if you're getting equity as a security operations team member. Okay, yeah. So what did that decision look like for you in choosing which tech company to go and contribute to?
I think there's a lot of different, there's a load of different things, like same as
Yeah.
choosing, choosing any career. There's a load of different opportunities that you could go to, and it depends on like the speciality that you're in as well. Like, do you want to stay a little bit more general? Do you want to like go deep into red teaming? Do you want to, be an
Sure.
application security engineer? That'll definitely have an effect. The other thing that definitely had an effect on my choice and Owen's choice was, the opportunity was there in Ireland, and we wanted to
Yeah.
like that. That's definitely not something to the ability to lead a security operations team from Ireland and not from either like the Bay, or it's changing now, but like the Bay or Seattle or Austin or wherever, had a massive effect. So those companies that say, hey, you can hire remote, make a big difference. I think though, if I'm looking at the companies that I'd recommend working with today, or when I was making that decision, those that are like forward thinking in their technology. So like your cloud, like if you want to, your cloud 500 kind of companies, if you want to pick a company, if you want to pick a company to lead a security operations team, I try to pick one that's there's, that the stack is going to be reasonably good. That the people on their engineering team are going to be really solid. That the number of that there's going to be buy-in, that security is actually important. So that's why like DocuSign was really interesting. They took security super seriously because they're more expensive than all of their competitors, and as a result, security is non-negotiable. One of the reasons people chose DocuSign was trust. So we're like, okay, they're definitely going to invest in security, but also the stack wasn't the stack wasn't incredible on the security side, but we knew that like the people that we were dealing with were really solid. And we've got to choose the stack then. We got to, pick our own SIM, we got to pick our own EDR. And we, like that ability to, I suppose, to know that, hey, we're able to pick best in breed, and we're able to like build up a program ourselves is really, really interesting. So yeah, if I'm thinking about it, those companies that actually do value, like, but you don't want to go into an organization where they're like, what we're using, I'll be harsh here, but like using McAfee SIM and, whatever, like Symantec DLP on our end, like, and, you're like, what? I don't want to spend my career, my next, however many years of my career doing that. You want to spend, the next few years, if you're now on that company, that's, hey, here's what the stack's going to be. It's going to be, I don't know, like Panther and Material and Tynes or whoever, like they're the, like, okay, that's really exciting. And maybe it's like, they're like, yeah, we're on Elastic. You're like, perfect. That's great. It's like, that's really solid. But at the same time, you don't want to move into somebody that's like, yeah, we're picking this, if they say we're using IBM Curator and we've got like the entire IBM suite, like, okay, that's hard.
And this
I'm
kind
being
of
harsh
leads
there,
into
I'll offend some people, but that's fine.
That's okay. That's okay. This kind of leads into a little bit of something Tynes related as well, right? Where like if you have a security team that's clearly budgeting for like the value of security in their product, then you're going to have more access to like automation and orchestration tools as well, right? So like SOAR platforms. And I don't know whether or not that was the case at DocuSign at the time, but my point is, if you're working in a team that prioritizes security, then not only are you getting to use like better tools, but you're also more than likely going to have automation capabilities. So you don't have to worry about as many of like the mundane parts of the job. So in theory, at least, it would be like a more interesting day to day because you have some of those more menial pieces automated.
Yeah, and like you're totally right. I think the expectation is really high, so as a result, you can't get away with not automating. You have
Sure.
to you have to automate, because otherwise you won't get to those. They expect you to have the security level of a company that's public at a budget of a company that's a Series C or whatever,
Yeah.
which makes it really makes it really challenging. But yeah, those companies that do have those companies that do have that, like that SOAR platform, or that have like that advanced stack, it makes it a lot more enticing to work. Your team are going to be happier. They're going to be working in tools that are that are friendly. But yeah, if we use this all the time, but if you've got if you hire somebody out of college, or if you hire somebody with 3 or 4 years experience, and you put them analyzing phishing emails every single day, or analyzing DLP alerts, or analyzing even your EDR alerts, and you say, hey, the next 6 months of your life are going to be analyzing and then tuning the spoof at DocuSign.com mailbox. Like, okay, I'll take that 6 months of or that year on my CV of what this looks like, and then I'll go and I'll parlay that into a higher paying role in another company, and I'll take some of the lessons learned. But as a security leader, if you're told, hey, you can invest in new technology, you will be able to go in and you can like even see the playbook there. It's like, okay, I'll like whatever, buy an EDR, I'll implement I'll implement a SOAR, and I'll be able to get rid of all these like boring alerts. I'll create higher fidelity alerts, and my team will be
Right.
happier. It's a real win-win.
So last thing at DocuSign, and then I feel like we're just building up into Tines perfectly here. But you presided over the IPO there as well. I mean, presided, maybe not the right term, but you were at least still involved from a
Yeah,
security
yeah.
operations standpoint. I think you were leading the security operations team at that point. How did that IPO mentality, and you mentioned like, hey, Series C company that's trying to act as a public company, obviously you'd prepared for that for some period of time, but how did the maybe attitude across the company change as you got to that point in the IPO?
Yeah, I think you'll notice it. You'll notice it reasonably quickly, or reasonably early on in the process, where suddenly there's an interest, and a pretty quick interest that comes on, saying, "Hey, can you talk to us about all of our security processes?" You're like, "All of our security, all of our security processes," and I need documentation on them, and I need to be able to explain what they do. You'll start getting your, and SOC 2 is now prerequisite for doing business with pretty much any major company, but you'll start getting your certifications in order, and yeah, there'll be a little bit more budget, which is fantastic. What then happens is, people will start like asking questions around, hey, what are those like P1 instances that we should really be like afraid of? Like, what do we not have so that, if we go public, or if we're going public, that nothing can like hamper that? And that's a good opportunity to, get some more budget and improve your process.
Sure.
But the big thing that changes is just the serious level of the serious nature of of the alerts, that now an incident isn't just something that, and it's never something that you can like cover up, but now an incident is a board level incident, no matter pretty much what it is. Like if there's an anticipation of any sort of data loss, it becomes something that the CEO is going to want to know about, and the CFO is going to want to know about, because you've not only got like data protection requirements, you've also got the requirements to make that information public at the same time, so that, and I've experienced my fair share of P1s in eBay and DocuSign, but you have to make that like information public at the same time to all your investors, so there's no like shock to the market. So
Right.
it's like what you'll find is that people are then like more wary of, or your legal team will be more closer involved. They won't want to declare an incident. They'll say like, hey, this is actually just an alert instead of an incident. Even that's their terminology, but like it gets very serious. And you'll find things that, and a lot of our customers automate this now in Tines, but now all of a sudden, your incident notes have to be very very detailed. Your comms have to be in a completely separate channel. It can't be in like a security channel, because everything is now discoverable, or could be discoverable in a potential lawsuit. You'll find things that like you'll be bringing in external counsel for a bunch of different things, purely so that the conversations can be attorney-client privileged, which is a really strange concept, but it'll happen. The last thing that happens, and this is like really sad to say, but a lot of people that have been there for a while will start leaving after the window of like,
Oh, yeah, sure.
after the exercise window opens, like 6 months after. So you kind of have to like rebuild your processes and get ready for it. That, what, like those people that were only around to, that's fine. It's, that I'm not, there's no shame in that. Like we're around to see the paycheck. When they leave, all of a sudden you'll see now there's a brand new tech ops team, a brand new whatever compliance team, like a whole load of new faces on the security team, and the culture starts changing as well. It's no longer like a hot hip growing startup. It's now like it's changing into a more mature team, and it's fine. It's but it's, yeah, the process changes. We've a bunch of our customers have gone through the process, and it's interesting.
And so I think, if I'm understanding my timeline correctly, maybe you weren't 6 months, but you were probably around that timeline, right? So, and let me try to just kind of lay this out here and see if I have this all correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
Owen left DocuSign a little bit before you, a year or so before you,
Yeah.
and started working on Tines. And at that point, it was kind of the first time where you said, I'm going to stick with DocuSign, at least for the time being. I'm sure that there were some
Yeah.
incentives that came along with that, and the upcoming IPO and whatnot, that made that decision challenging. IPO happened. You ended up working there for some additional period of time. And then Owen ended up pulling you into Tines as a co-founder, right? What did that conversation and kind of backstory look like?
The backstory is like we'd worked together for a long time, so we'd worked together
Yeah.
for for 7 or 8 years before that. So we knew, we knew our operating model together. For I
Yeah.
don't know, there's a better phrase there, and we also knew that we could stand each other. Like being in a startup, you're working in the same room for whatever 15, 16 hours a day, and it's no longer that, but it's that's just purely because of COVID. But it's like we knew that we could work together. We knew that we could trust each other. We knew we were on the same page, and we also knew that like we had the same a lot of the same security experience in what we were doing. So when we talked about it, like Owen talked about it for a long time. Yeah, like I was very tempted to just like hand in my notice the exact same day. The reason I didn't is that like kind of have to be heads down building the product, and Owen's an engineering guy, and I'm not an engineering guy. So as a result, yeah, he like went heads down to build the product. I could have left earlier. There was definitely some like incentives for on the stock side. There was also like a little bit of like still there's always risk in the startup, but there's definitely a lot of risk where he was like, you know what, like I'm not sure that this is going to I'm not sure that we're going to be successful here. But once yeah, I made up my mind very early. I was like, okay, I want to join. It's just a question of when. So we said, hey, this particular date, that's when you'll hand in your notice. So handed in my notice and joined pretty shortly thereafter. And yeah, it was a lot of like we were working together, or we were chatting all the time back and forth during it. But yeah, it was great to start.
Yeah. So then, as far as the Times product itself, right? Maybe let me take a quick stab at it, and then you can kind of correct me and fill in the gaps. But essentially, the idea is automating security workflows from a no-code solution, right? So essentially, building in integrations with different APIs, SaaS applications, any of the applications that you're using within your organization, and being able to build essentially the way I thought of it was like an Azure Logic app for all of your different security tools and workflows. So you just kind of drag and drop little blocks, and then all of a sudden you have your automated process that used to have to be performed manually every single day. Is that basically it in a nutshell?
Yeah, very similar. Like one or two things that, so we kind of don't like the word like integration, and it is an integration, but it's that like in Times we don't really rely on any integrations. You can connect to anything. So Azure is a good example there, that like the Azure Logic apps, you have to build an integration. So as a result, if you want to connect to, I don't know, a brand new threat intel API that some tool companies just stood up, you have to, write a whole load of code in order to just, make, get the IOCs. In Times, it's trivial. Just like you connect the same way as you connect using Postman. So you just like a curl command, paste that into Times, and you've built that connection. So it's really, really fast. The second thing is that like you really don't, because of that, because we don't rely on any pre-built integrations, it doesn't require any like complicated programming at all. It's like it's very, very fast, and you can build really rich workflows, which, no offense to your Azure Logic apps, they're a lot more complicated to they're really complicated to build out. You can build like 5-6 step workflows. That's absolutely fine. But you're not going to build an actual, that'll get you 60% of the way there. You're not going to build something that will automate a phishing response where it's like, oh, you're analyzing headers, you're whatever, extracting URLs, you're uploading files to sandboxes. Forget about that in some of those tools. So it's a very, very like lightweight and flexible automation platform. But yeah, the similarities are very, very are there. It's the same. It's the same idea, I suppose.
Yeah. So one of the things that kind of struck me the more I was looking into Times and your background as well, right, is you and Owen both come from a security operations background. And if I have my timeline correct, like 2018 or so, when you're leaving DocuSign, is around when SOAR is starting to gain more traction in the market, right? Like it's not mainstream by any means. It probably still isn't mainstream in most organizations today. But I have to imagine, well, let me frame it this way. With Times today, it seems like it's marketed for any security workflow. So not necessarily just security operations, but any kind of responsibility in a team that has to be performed repetitively. Did it start as kind of a SOAR platform and then you expanded it later on? Or was that the vision from the get-go that it was going to be for all security team members, regardless of which kind of domain or specific team that you were working in?
Yeah, so like the vision, it's a great question. That the reason we started Times was because we looked at all those other automation platforms. We looked at your Demisto, we looked at your Phantom, we looked at your swim lanes, and we said they're just way too complicated. So we tried a couple of them, and we said these are actually impossible to use. And some of them, that the phrase we like to use is some of them had a lot of potential, but they weren't a tool that we felt that the people on our team would be able to get value out of, because they'd spend all their time in Python, or they'd spend all their time trying to configure some like dashboard that you wanted to be able to do something crazy in. And it just got way too complicated. When we started Tines, we took that approach that was very different, which is instead of building integrations, instead of like being a case management system, instead of being like that full-fledged like kind of legacy SOAR platform, we said, actually, we're just going to focus on automation, and we're going to be the best at it. But also we're not going to focus on the pure security operations workflows like a SOAR, a traditional SOAR would, because then you're building very specific functionality that's not universal. For flexibility, you need to try to make it as simple as possible and like boil down those concepts. So in Tines, we don't have 100 different integrations. We've got 8 actions, and using those 8 actions, you're going to be able to automate pretty much any workflow. So you can connect to another API endpoint, but connecting to another like an internal API endpoint or commercial off the shelf endpoint, the exact same type of action, and it's really really easy to configure. Same as triggering yes or no. So we deliberately basically built the platform so that it will be flexible to not just be used for security, any security, but also like any operations workflow. So it could be like tech ops, site reliability engineering, or DevOps, or it could be like IT. And we've got a bunch of customers in those spaces as well.
I feel like setting up that 8 actions idea, like, hey, we can solve all of your issues with 8 actions. Like, that's something I just have to unpack a little bit. What are those 8 actions as you define them?
Yeah, so I'm gonna So the very first is a webhook. So it receives events from another tool. So Splunk or whatever sends a webhook, we are able to start processing it. The next is a like HTTP request action, so that connects to any API. Also can connect to 1 or 2 other things with a little bit of configuration, like some database and things like that. The next is an event transformation action, so just modifies data. Allows you to extract out, loop through to create a new array. Allows you to like deduplicate, basically transform data into a slightly different format. A standard enough trigger action, yes, nope. There's an email action, which allows you to send an email, an IMAP action, which allows you to connect to an IMAP endpoint. Arguably, you could group those 2 together, but whatever. And then there's two others which are like similar enough concepts. One is groups. So it's arguably not even an action. It's just you're able to group a bunch of other actions together, select some input, select some output, and just like tidy things up. And the last thing is so we call our workflows stories. A send to story action. So that's the equivalent of a global function. So you're actually able to call a group of actions or call a workflow from another workflow. So if you've got upload a file to a sandbox or analyze a domain, that could be something that you want to do in 3 or 4 different workflows. So as a result, you can have that as a function that you call from another story. So those are the 8 different actions. But it's pretty universal that we always get asked like, hey, when are you going to add another? And we added groups there recently, for example. But yeah, we don't really come across any workflows where people are unable to do it. It does require a little bit of like change in thinking, but it's a lot more flexible. And once you understand those paradigms, you're able to move very, very, very fast. And because it's a real flexible platform, like copy paste, undo, redo, you've got backups, all that sort of stuff. You can see, you can copy the logic from one particular workflow to another and just move very, very fast.
Yeah, it's really interesting just to hear a little bit more about the approach of the company as a whole in terms of how you've emphasized that kind of simplicity of the platform, like even just the idea of framing the conversation in, hey, you can solve everything you need in 8 simple actions. And then saying like all these different third-party platforms that exist today have done such a good job of building like REST API compatibility and building in like webhook compatibility as well, like you mentioned, right? That it just becomes much easier to leverage the kind of complex design and like API backend that these companies have created to then make your platform simple and easy to use. So yeah, it's just a fascinating approach there. And one thing that I want to make sure we touch on before we wrap up here, I know we're coming close to time. You have this kind of background in Ireland security, you and Owen both, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You decided to found Tynes with the headquarters in Ireland, and now I know you have a Boston office as well. But
Yep.
just tell me a little bit about what the cybersecurity market's like in Ireland, right? I know talking to founders across the world on secure ventures so far, like a lot of these different businesses end up coming to the US at one point, one way or another, right? And
Mhm.
so part of it is about, okay, how can you capitalize on like your local market and maybe have a strategic advantage because your competition isn't quite as strong, and then ultimately pivoting to that international market as well and being able to build some of those relationships. And again, you mentioned eBay was in the US for a little bit, so you obviously had some connections there. But again,
Mhm.
kind of just walk me through what was it like building a cybersecurity company in Ireland, which is not one of the kind of main players in security today?
Yeah, so when we set out to build Tynes, we weren't like setting out to be a multi-billion-dollar company or anything like that. We were trying to
Sure.
set out to build a company that we wish we could have worked with, and the company that we wish we could have like worked for as well. So what I mean by that is that you look at our marketing page, we're not saying we stop breaches. We're not saying, like we use AI to detect all these, these attacks. We're very friendly. We're saying, hey, we'll help you. But the marketing approach and the approach of the entire company, like we're not selling snake oil. We're saying, hey, we're actually able to help, and we know what we're talking about. So that was like that's part of the reason that we started it, was that we said, we want to build a company that we think, we worked in the valley, both of us, and we said we think we can do this, and we think we can do it do it the right way. As part of that as well, like I think if we were trying to, we bootstrapped for for the first while of the company. We didn't raise venture capital. I think if we wanted to raise venture capital immediately, we probably would have said, you know what, we should go over and, I don't know, join Y Combinator, or like take some
Sure.
funding from a Sequoia or a Benchmark or whoever. But instead we said, like let's try to build from Ireland, and let's see what we can get. And to a certain extent, building it doesn't really matter where you are. And also
Yeah.
we had a really good network as well. So we did, we ran and worked with security teams in the US, and yeah, as I said, we both spent time over there. So we were able to get some early adopters and like beta testers from companies in the valley. So to say that, like, it was still very like, the vast majority of our early customers were still in. We had Bank of Ireland, but they were our only Irish customer for the longest time.
Oh well.
So the vast majority of our customers were still in the US. Having said that, yeah, the security teams, the security like culture in Ireland, there's some good security teams, but the vast majority of them are coming from American startups. The reason we like Ireland, though, there's really good like sales talent and really good drive from people that
Oh,
like
interesting.
the European HQs of like Google, Facebook, Amazon, as well as great startups like Stripe, HubSpot, Intercom. All those companies have like massive European offices. So we knew, and they all have that drive of seeing a company like go through that IPO process. So when we were thinking about should we move to the US, we're like, you know what, there's actually great talent here from not just sales, from legal, from HR, from customer support, customer success, all that sort of stuff. And most importantly, yeah, there's a little bit of like green Irish pride that we want to be able to say you can actually
Yeah.
build a great startup from anywhere, and we're very proud of our Irish culture and our
Yeah.
heritage. So
No, that's a great summary, right? The combination of not necessarily like the best cybersecurity engineers in the world, but being able to capitalize on that strength in sales, which obviously is still incredibly relevant to a
yeah,
cybersecurity startup. And even how you use that like Irish pride idea, even though you weren't selling to necessarily Irish companies, right? Like it's, hey, being Irish is like a part of our core, just belief system, I guess. That's probably not the right word, but you know where I'm going with it as a company. But
identity. Yeah.
yeah, identity of the company, even though you're not necessarily selling to Irish companies, it just shows that, okay, this company has like that identity that they feel strongly about. So no, this has all been awesome. Again, really appreciate your time, Thomas, and walking through this whole story. I think there's so much more to dive into with each of these individual experiences, but hopefully this is a great overview for listeners and some interesting perspective. Ceremonial last question for you: are you currently looking for investment or hiring?
We're definitely hiring, yeah. So times.com/careers, and once you take some investment, you're on a roller coaster where
Yeah,
there's always people tapping you up. You're always chatting with investors. Whether or not we'll take some, we've got a lot of great customers and a lot of cash in our bank. But if the right opportunity comes along, maybe. But yeah, tons and tons of roles in. We've got an office in San Fran now, so in Boston, in San Fran, even remote. And then we've just made our first couple of hires in Australia as well. So, and loads in Ireland. So yeah,
awesome.
times.com/careers.
Awesome. Thanks again, Thomas.
Thank you, Kyle.